And I looked in his eyes, and there was nothing but pure evil.
Scary, isn't it? Hello, Champagne Nightmares. Welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, I don't know how you found me, but please stick around, hit that subscribe button, and check out my channel. My name is Janessa, and I am North Dakota's trash queen of glam, geek, and gore. And it's spooky season. I am in the middle of watching all kinds of horror movies, new ones, old ones, and so I wanted to start talking about the big three. So I've referenced this in a few videos on my channel, but the big three slasher franchises. If I had to think of a subgenre of horror that is my favorite, I love the slashers. And the big three franchises are Halloween, Friday the 13th, and Nightmare on Elm Street. So I thought, let's dive into one of those and talk about the kind of confusing, convoluted timeline that has developed over the Halloween series. So if you're excited to get into that, or even just figure out what the hell is going on and has gone on and what's still gone on and what's canon and what's not, then stick around because we're getting into it right now. Yes, so the big three slasher franchises. Halloween was the first, started in 1978, followed in 1980 by Friday the 13th, and a few years later in 1984 we got Nightmare on Elm Street. And those three films and their various sequels really dominated the high-profile slasher genre, subgenre of horror. But you know what? There were a lot of imitations, there was a lot of dupes, there was a lot of people trying that slasher subgenre, but those were the big three that really made the biggest impression and really have been around for a long time. Now, before I even hear you clicky-clacking away in the comments, those of you who are Texas Chainsaw Massacre fans, relax. I'm planning to do a whole video about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre series because it's not necessarily a slasher movie. It definitely lives in the neighborhood. It shares a zip code, but it's not necessarily just a slasher film. There's other elements, and I think it's really interesting, and I think it's really unique, but it deserves its own video. So it's not part of the big three. Let me live. Nerd rage quelled. So we're going to talk about Halloween because Halloween was the first. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about the history of slashers. I've referred to this in previous videos, but the slasher subgenre really owes its genesis to 1960s Psycho. So that movie came out of nowhere. So Alfred Hitchcock, who is a master of suspense and kind of a creepy guy. There's a lot about him that's really interesting and a little bit disturbing. Definitely check him out if you want to know more about that. But in 1960, he gave us Norman Bates and the Bates Motel in the movie Psycho. And basically it starred Janet Leigh, which is going to be important later, as Marion Crane. And she's this woman who's just kind of a secretary. She's not really happy in her life. She's got this boyfriend who's got all this debt, and she ends up stealing a large amount of money from her employer and going on the run. And she ends up at the Bates Motel. And this movie is revolutionary for so many reasons. The first of which is that the protagonist of the film, Marion Crane, dies a third of the way into the movie. So that had never happened before, because movies tend to give you a point of view. Yes, there's lots of other characters. We get lots of other flavor of their perspective and things, but there's usually one. And in horror, it's usually your final girl who gives you that perspective. So Marion was the perspective, third of the way in, dead. The only person left for you to identify with is Norman. Because the other characters, Marion's sister is kind of a late addition. She's really shrill. She's not very likable. Her boyfriend is kind of a layabout. He's a little bit of a jerk. The detective is an asshole, Arbogast. And so there's nobody else to really like except for sweet, quiet, unassuming Norman Bates. So the audience is taken in by Norman's perspective. And they want him to be safe. They want Mother to not get him in trouble. Because Mother killed Marion, and Mother is bad, but poor sweet Norman, he's just browbeaten by Mother. And of course, then we have that infamous reveal. I cannot imagine what it was like to be a viewer in 1960. If I could go back and beat anybody in history, I would be one of the people who was in the first showing at Psycho, because that would blow my mind, that all of a sudden Norman is revealed to be Mother. And that's really kind of the genesis of slasher films. And it took a while for them to percolate, because we don't even really start seeing them until the 70s. So in like 1974, we get Black Christmas. Check out this video here if you want to see more about Black Christmas and the sequels, and which one is definitely the best. Which is a great movie, but it's not necessarily great as what we think of a slasher film now. They hadn't really figured out the rules, they hadn't figured out the expectations, and there's a couple other kind of early attempts, and then we get to 1978's Halloween, directed by John Carpenter, starring daughter of the original Marion Crane, Jamie Lee Curtis, as Laurie Strode, our final girl. So there's a lot of development that goes into it, but then this really starts bringing up this new slasher subgenre, and Halloween really kind of set the tone and set a lot of those rules. If you're a Scream fan, a lot of those rules that they talk about in the original Scream can be traced back to 1978 and Halloween. So of course, we're still trying to work out all the details, all the rules and everything. And then John Carpenter comes along in 1978 with Halloween, originally titled The Babysitter Murders. So this wasn't originally meant to be a Halloween film. And what's funny, a little behind the scenes trivia, is if you look at the film, it doesn't look very Halloween-y, because it was actually filmed in the middle of summer. And so all the trees and the bushes and everything are green. And so they actually had to go and buy fake leaves, or they found some leaves or whatever, but they painted them so that they could sprinkle them around and make it look more fall-like. So if you've ever wondered why it's so green in Haddonfield on Halloween, it's because it was filmed in the middle of summer. So Halloween is the first of the big three, and I've always said this about the big three slasher franchises, is that Halloween has the best first movie. It really does set up a lot of those rules for slasher films, and it's the best first movie, and it has the worst sequels. So with Halloween, some of the sequels get so bad that eventually they don't even try to explain them away anymore. They just retcon. Just retcon, retcon, retcon. That becomes the magic bullet for the Halloween series. So in the first one, very straightforward premise. We have Laurie Strode, who's a little bit quiet. She's a little bit awkward. It's Halloween, and some of her friends are going to party or meet up with her boyfriend, and she's just babysitting for little Tommy Doyle. And all of a sudden, babysitters start getting killed one by one. There's this mental patient, Michael Myers, who is shown at the beginning of the movie killing off his sister, Judith, played by Sandy Johnson. Friend of the show. She was on my podcast. She is a joy and a delight. And so she is kind of the first victim, and then we flash forward to 1978. And Laurie Strode and her group of friends are being pursued by this faceless killer. He's got this mask, and of course most people know by now that the mask that they used was actually a William Shatner mask that they kind of applied a little heat to distort the features and painted it white. I guess you're not gonna live long and prosper, bitch. And that was basically the first movie, was Michael Myers is stalking these babysitters and killing them. A lot of them get killed after they have sex, or we see them naked, so there's a lot of that early sort of morality that creeps into the slasher subgenre. But Laurie Strode manages to escape, and at the end, his psychiatrist, Dr. Loomis, shoots him and he falls off a balcony, and then he disappears. So that's the basic storyline, just that he's stalking these random group of teenagers, and the house across the street from where Laurie is babysitting is the old Myers house. It could have been that simple, it could have been done. That's all we had to have, right? Wrong. So Halloween 2 does something that other movies at the time then started to occasionally pick up on, where even though it comes out a couple of years later, it is set the same night as the original Halloween. So Laurie Strode has been taken to the hospital, and of course, Dr. Loomis doesn't know where Michael is. He's talking to the cops. They're trying to figure out, how do we find him? They're like, he's got to be dead. And it's like, well, explain that then, because he's not here. There's no body. So Halloween 2, they're trying to figure out what's going on. Well, then Michael is going to the hospital where Laurie is. And part of what's added to the lore in part 2 is they decide that Laurie is Michael's sister. His other sisters. They add this in. It's not in the first movie at all. Some people think that this has been the situation from the very beginning. It wasn't until part 2 that they decided that Laurie was Michael's sister. And that after he killed his first sister on that Halloween 15 years ago, that now he's back to kill his other sister and that he was coming after Laurie. And that's the reason behind this whole thing. And that's what really starts the family connection to Michael Myers. So flash forward to Halloween 3. More Michael Myers, right? Wrong. So because Halloween gets the earliest start of these slasher franchises, we haven't really figured out in the wider culture that these sequels are going to keep doing as well as they're going to keep doing. This is still pretty early. Halloween is the only one that's really had a sequel at this point. Friday the 13th came out in 1980. And so it's still pretty early. So for Halloween 3, they're like, we're going to do something completely different. So in Halloween 3, they're like, let's do a standalone story. Let's break away from this. Let's not reference this at all. And so what they do is they come up with the idea of the Silver Shamrock Corporation. And this is a corporation that's run by witches or warlocks. There's some sort of evil entities that are behind this. And what they want to do is they're going to cast this spell to kill all of these children on Halloween night. And the way they're going to do it is by creating these enchanted masks and having them stand at the television set on Halloween night. And they're going to play this jingle that's part of the commercial. And it's going to send the signal through the TV. There's one of the kids that's shown and his head kind of breaks down into a bunch of bugs and centipedes and stuff like that. It's really bizarre. Halloween 3 went away from the Michael Myers altogether. Well, that movie is really divisive. Some people, that's their favorite of the franchise. They're like, forget all that Michael Myers stuff. This one's really cool. It's different. It's something new. Some people hate it because it distracted from the whole growing storyline. But love it or hate it, that's really where the franchise takes a turn. So then we have 4 and 5. Halloween 4 and Halloween 5. And this is another duo of movies that are set on the same night. So Halloween 4 comes out, and then Halloween 5 is supposed to be set the same night, later that night. And both Halloween 4 and 5 feature Jamie Lloyd. So she's a new character, and the way they explain her away, because, girl, Jamie Lee Curtis was not setting foot anywhere near this trash, let me tell you. She was big Hollywood at that point. So they said that Laurie Strode had a daughter named Jamie Lloyd, and that then she died in a car accident. That's going to come back later. She's been orphaned, and now she's living with relatives. And then Michael Myers again comes back. That seems to be the big problem, is that the sanitarium is always trying to move him. And they're like, why don't we do this the day before Halloween? That seems like a good idea, even though he has a long and sordid history of killing people on Halloween and escaping right before that. So why don't let's really think about that. Let's really make some choices. So he gets loose and comes after her. And for whatever reason, there seems to be a psychic connection between Jamie Lloyd and Michael Myers. And that's developed, I think it's a little bit in the fourth one. I haven't gone back and rewatched all of these to refresh myself. I think they introduced it a little bit in part 4, and then it's really sort of explored in part 5. But basically, he's trying to kill off his family. So that becomes his, MO. He's trying to kill off members of his family. And so now, because Laurie Strode is dead, he's going to come for her daughter, Jamie. Now, the quality on 4 and 5, not great. The story, it's kind of interesting. Some of the kills are interesting, but it's pretty cheesy. It's pretty poorly done. But it does feature Danielle Harris as little Jamie Lloyd, an iconic role. Her in the blood-spattered clown costume. Absolutely one of the most iconic images from the Halloween series. And they're bad, but they're not Curse of Michael Myers bad. So part 6 is The Curse of Michael Myers. And this one features the very illustrious Paul Rudd as a grown-up Tommy Doyle. So the little boy that was being babysat in the first movie, he's gonna make some appearances throughout. And so he shows up now, and he's a grown-up Tommy Doyle. And this is one of the few kind of slasher movies where there is technically a final girl, but the real protagonist of the film is a boy. It's Paul Rudd's character. It's Tommy Doyle. Now, they put a woman character with him so that we can still have the final girl, but it really is Paul Rudd's story. And that's echoed in Friday the 13th with Tommy Jarvis, another Tommy. He becomes kind of a final girl figure, even though they add in other female figures around him. And it happens probably most famously in Nightmare on Elm Street 2, the gay one, Freddy's Revenge, where the final girl is actually a final boy. So we're going to do a whole video where we compare the big three franchises and how there's a lot of echoes of each other throughout the whole series, and I'm going to map it out for you. But that's something to know for The Curse of Michael Myers, that they include Paul Rudd, and he's kind of a final girl. That's the most interesting thing about this movie, because it introduces this weird cult element. So it's not just that Michael is this kind of soulless, empty vessel of evil. He becomes a weapon, maybe? It's almost unwatchable. It's so poorly hacked together and edited that it's hard to really tell what the story is. But basically there's this cult called the Cult of Thorn. And they choose somebody every so many years who then they have to kill their entire family, and that brings prosperity to this cult. And it's all these people who are leaders, police officers, ACAB, and all of these different people that are benefiting from this cult and the Cult of Thorn. So Michael Myers now is revealed. So he actually finds Jamie Lloyd and kills her, but she has a baby, and he doesn't find the baby. And Paul Rudd, of course, Tommy Doyle, ends up with the baby. So Michael Myers not done yet. Now he's got to find the baby. He's got to destroy his entire family. So he kills any of the other relatives, and then he's trying to track down Paul Rudd. So they make a point of bringing back Tommy Doyle from the first movie for no reason. Because it doesn't matter that he was in the first movie. It establishes this convoluted backstory about how Michael is trying to kill everyone in his family, which Tommy Doyle ain't got fuck all to do with his family. So what's the point of that? It doesn't matter. It's just like fan casting. It's just lip service to fans, whatever. It's really poorly written and poorly edited. Now, I did buy a bootleg copy on eBay of like a director's cut, and that did put in some scenes that explained a little bit, but not much. And there's this guy who's like the Man in Black, who gets off a bus and is like this foreboding character, and they never explain him. You never know what he's doing there. He makes no goddamn sense at all. And that's where they leave it with The Curse of Michael Myers. Now we're coming up on 1998, the 20th anniversary of the first Halloween. Jamie Lee Curtis got some bills to pay. I don't know what's going on with her, but they convinced her to come back. And so in 1998, we get Josh Hartnett's worst haircut ever in Halloween H2O. So Halloween H2O is where we first get a retcon. So that's where you go back and you pretend that all that continuity that happened before didn't happen. And they take it all the way back to part 3. So, of course, part 3, they ignore that ever happened. But what they kept is from part 2, they kept that Laurie is Michael's sister. And so Laurie now has moved across the country to California. She's a professor at this little private college. She's got a fun boyfriend. And she's like, I'm always on the run. She's going by Carrie, I think her name is. Probably Carrie Lake. Maybe she went crazy and then went off to run for governor in Arizona after this was all over. I don't know what happened. It gets weird. That could be one of the endings. So she is there in this college, and all of a sudden Michael escapes. Now, this is the movie Donald Pleasance sadly died, and he had been with the series. God bless him. The last movie that he did was The Curse of Michael Myers, and that's such a shite film. So, of course, they try to pay some sort of homage to him and how much he meant to that series. And they bring one of the original nurses back, and she's like his nurse. And she gets killed off in that movie. That's important later. And so Michael finds out where Laurie has gone. And so he goes off to California as well. He's going to kill his sister and, I don't know, then become an actress or a model. I don't know what's going on. But he takes off. He's going to go try to track her down. So she's there with her son. And the only way that she references the prior continuity is she says, I faked my death in a car accident and I moved here. Okay, bitch. So the car accident was in part 4. That's how they explained why Laurie Strode wasn't with her daughter, is because she died in a car accident. So they kept that piece of the history of like, oh, I faked my death in a car accident. And it's like, okay, but is the daughter not real? Because the math ain't mathin', sis. I don't know what's going on, but where did this daughter go? So we've erased the daughter. We retconned back to the car accident. But the car accident happened, but it didn't happen. Not really. She's not dead. It's this whole thing. So it basically takes it back to part 3. I mean, not part 3, because part 3 is not related to the whole thing. But it takes it pre-part 4. So Laurie is still his sister. So then Michael Myers shows up and starts killing everybody. Da, 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 da. This was at a time where there were other movies that were trying to give a decent send-off to these slasher films that had sort of spiraled into absurdity. So there are several of these movies. So with the Friday the 13th series, they have Jason Goes to Hell, which is not a great movie, and it recognized that the Friday the 13th movies got so bizarre by the end, and it's just trying to like send it on its way with some respect. But of course, all of these movies did well, so they have to bring it back, right? So H2O sets up this perfect like send-off, where at the very end, Michael escapes capture again, and he's in the back of this van unconscious on a gurney, and Laurie Strode grabs an axe, and she takes off in the van, and she's going to finish things. And so then Michael sits up in the back and then attacks her. The van crashes, and she's kind of limping around, and then she sees that Michael is trapped under a tree. And she walks up to him, and of course it's just that mask. And so he kind of feebly like reaches out to her or whatever. It's clearly a trap. But we see her look at him, and it's like, this is my brother. I know he's done all these horrible things. And she starts looking like she's going to reach out to him, and it's like, girl, it's a trap. What are you doing? Like, make better choices. Don't you watch TikTok? That man going to give you good dick and then run up your credit. Like, get away from him. Like, that is a trap. You need to recognize those. So she is like going to reach out, and then she like pulls back, picks up the axe, and whacks his head off. It's the perfect ending. If they could have just let it die. But of course, Halloween H2O made a whole bunch of money. And so they're like, well, we gotta have a sequel. And then we got Halloween Resurrection. And Halloween Resurrection, the way that they explain it away is that somehow Michael had switched his outfit with a paramedic and put his mask on a paramedic and put him in the van. Doesn't explain why the paramedic would come out of this and attack Laurie. Like, why wouldn't he be like, hey, I'm wearing this fucking mask, and take it off? No. So they just pretend like there was this switcheroo, and then Laurie is now in a mental institution because she went a little batty after killing this paramedic, and Michael is still on the loose. And she's like not taking her meds and hiding him under her mattress because she knows he's coming or whatever. And she's going to trap him. And he kills Laurie Strode at the very beginning of the film. We're 15 minutes in. Again, I'm not going to judge her. I don't know the story. Jamie Lee must have had bills to pay. She came back and did that movie, but she's like, I'll come back, kill me in the opening, and then I'll be done with this trash because this movie's going to be terrible. And it was. So then after she's dead, well, then what's the point? Well, we've retconned past the Cult of Thorn, so we don't have that anymore. So now Michael just wants to go home. So Michael goes home, and they are filming a reality show in his home. And so now there's all of these little wannabe influencers. This is really kind of pre-influencer culture, but it's really reality TV. I want to be part of this. And so they're all wearing these cameras. And so that's how you get a lot of the POV shots. It's actually being broadcast on an early version of the internet where people can watch. And so then there's somebody that is watching that knows one of the people and is trying to give them advice. Now this film, for being trash, it does feature Tyra Banks. It features Starbuck from Battlestar Galactica, Katie Sackhoff. It features Busta Rhymes. I had forgotten about that. Tyra Banks is there, and she actually has a really interesting scene with Michael Myers where she puts up a little bit of a fight. And so they're there, but they all get killed off, of course. It's all gory and ridiculous. And so Michael Myers eventually gets ended by whoever the final girl is. I forget who it is. It's not Katie Sackhoff, and it's not Tyra Banks, so it's somebody else. I couldn't even be bothered to care. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. So then Halloween goes dormant for a little while, except we can't just let things alone, can we? We can't just have nice things. No, no, no. Then we have to have, in 2018, Halloween. And this is part of that whole reboot, requel thing where they had tried reboots with Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street. Those got varying degrees of critical trashing. Certainly Nightmare on Elm Street got trashed more. Friday the 13th, not always a favorite among fans, although I think it's delightful. So they were like, are we just going to do a reboot and get panned? No. So they decided to do this like requel thing where they bring in all the legacy characters. But for this, now we retcon again. And this time, even though Jamie Lee Curtis was in the earlier films, now we retcon all the way back to Halloween 1, the original. Which means that Laurie Strode is no longer Michael Myers' sister. So why is he obsessed with her? We don't know. He just is. He's just evil. He just wants to kill her. And of course, we've got this showdown that's been brewing for 40 years. And we find out that Laurie Strode is just as obsessed as we think Michael is. And she has basically ruined her entire life because she's just been getting ready for the day that Michael gets released, escapes, until he comes back for her. She's obsessed. So she's estranged from her daughter, who's played by Judy Greer, who we love. And she's kind of trying to have a relationship with her granddaughter, but Judy Greer doesn't like that, and so she's always trying to keep them apart, and she doesn't get along with her son-in-law. It's a whole thing, and Judy Greer's mad that she was raised in this paranoia, blah, blah, blah. It's been 40 years. So, of course, Michael does escape, and he comes back to Haddonfield. And the big reveal that they built into this movie is that Michael could give a fuck about Laurie Strode. Does not care. Is just trying to get home. And so the only reason he ends up attacking Laurie Strode is because her house is in between where he escaped and his own house. And it was all set up by his psychiatrist. So obviously Donald Pleasance passed away, rest in peace. So his new psychiatrist is obsessed with this obsession between Michael and Laurie that Michael doesn't even have. So he sets up this confrontation by facilitating Michael's escape and putting Laurie in the path between Michael and his home. So what the fuck is the point? So the whole thing is that Laurie is obsessed and she has her big showdown. And again, much like H2O, she's been obsessed. She's been building traps and doing all this stuff. She has this big epic fight with him. And eventually she gets him in the basement. Bars go over the stairs. They close the top. And the whole place is on fire. And we could have ended the series there. But no, it made money. So there has to be a sequel. And not just one sequel, 2 sequels. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about Halloween Kills. Mostly because Halloween Kills my will to live. I'll just leave this video here in case you haven't watched it. But basically, that movie means fuck all. Because we know from Halloween 2018 that Michael is not obsessed with Jamie Lee Curtis. So they're setting up this big, showdown, the final showdown between Michael and Laurie. But we all know that it doesn't matter because Michael's not obsessed with Laurie. Michael doesn't care about Laurie. That's never been the point. So why does this movie exist? Because when they announced it, they announced that they were doing 2 sequels. They announced that they were going to do 2 back-to-back sequels. Well, then we know that unless they're really going to flip the script and get creative, and that's asking too much, they're not going to have that final showdown be in this middle movie. They're going to save it to the end. And as expected, as much as you see Jamie Lee Curtis in the trailer of that movie is about how much you see of Jamie Lee Curtis in the entire film. So that movie is a whole lot of fan service. They bring back... If anybody even just wandered across the set at some point on the original Halloween and was still alive, they brought them back in some capacity. So they tried to build some story. It was terrible. It was awful. So that movie sucked. So then we get to Halloween Ends. Please, God, can this finally be the end? And yes, I've done a video about that one as well. And in this one, it just fails because they're trying to tell two stories. And either of those stories could potentially have been a good story, but neither one is because they half-assed both of them together. So, of course, we've got the Michael and Laurie story, which nobody cares about because we already learned he's not really obsessed with her, except now he kind of is, because now he might come after her. It's this whole thing. And there is a big showdown at the end, and it ends with her putting him through, like, this industrial grinder, and we're all like, maybe, finally, this will be the end, but they'll find some way to explain this shit away. And so they try to do that, and then there's this new story, which could have been really interesting. And what I think, if they had done this, I think it would have actually been genius. I think Halloween Kills should have been the end of the Michael Laurie story. I think they should have had a final confrontation, because then everybody would have been like, wait, what? What are they going to do in this last movie? They've just ended it right here. What else could be coming? And then you've got anticipation. Because the two stories don't make any sense together. Because the story of Michael Myers has always been that he is just, for whatever reason, soulless evil. Nothing made him that way. Now, the Rob Zombie remakes that happened in between Resurrection and the requel, those tried to give him some, like, troubled childhood trauma, some things that might have kicked him off. The regular Halloween franchise, that has always been about the fact that he is just evil. He just is. Nothing has made him evil. Nothing has influenced him. And that's the story. The other story that's happening in Halloween Kills is Corey Taylor. And Corey Taylor is somebody who was babysitting a kid who was playing a Halloween prank in this rich family's house, and they have this big ornate stairwell, and he accidentally knocks the kid off the stairwell over the banister to his death. And he was released. He didn't do it on purpose. He wasn't a murderer, but he's been sort of ostracized by the town. He's always getting beaten up and chased, and people hate him, and they talk about him, and nobody will be his friend. And it really is this story of evil being crafted by other shitty beings, by other shitty human people. And so it's completely at odds with Michael Myers. Michael Myers, where does evil come from? Michael Myers is evil because because evil just exists. Corey Taylor is evil because people specifically make people evil, because they're evil in response to their environment. And so these two stories do not mesh at all, but they try to run them together. And so eventually Corey gives in to his darker impulses and steals Michael's mask and becomes Michael, and, like, comes after Laurie to, like, complete the story or whatever. And then Michael shows up, takes his mask back after Corey is dead, and then he fights with Laurie. I mean, it just... If they wanted spectacle, they got spectacle, but it's spectacle that means absolutely nothing. If you give a shit about story, those last two movies are so offensive. And the only thing I can hope is that Laurie Strode putting his body through that industrial grinder finally puts an end to this fucking Halloween series. Or that they do something else. Do something new. Bring in a new chapter of the Silver Shamrock story. We've got much better CGI. We've got much better effects. Try that. Do something, but just let it die. So if you've had trouble following the Halloween series, that's why. Because it has been revamped and retconned again and requelled into oblivion. And I really stand behind my assertion that Halloween, of the big three slasher franchises, has the best first movie and the worst body of sequels. So that is the history of the Halloween series. Again, I'm going to do more videos on these big three slashers and comparing them, but I wanted to start this series with kind of a history of that franchise in particular, and how it developed and how it grew and changed, and help you kind of sketch out a rough timeline. There are other videos, other things that have done much more particular, so if you're really looking for details and dates and timelines and all that shit, there are other places that can help. If I find one, I'll link one here. But I really think that the sequels just go so far out into weird territory, and nothing gets paid off, and things get ignored. And it's just, it's so much, and yet somehow not enough. So that's the video. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you enjoyed this. There's going to be more. If you liked it, if you didn't, if you're a Halloween franchise fan, let me know down below. If you're Danielle Harris and you're like, look, bitch, I worked hard on those movies, you can leave me a comment. Let me know. If you're a Curse of Michael Myers stan and maybe you're Paul Rudd and you thought the movie was great, you can leave a comment down below. I don't know why Danielle or Paul would be watching this video, but please, I'll take the engagement. And so you can give me a thumbs up or you can give me a thumbs down. Paul, Danielle, give me that thumbs down because the algorithm is not a picky bitch and neither am I. And while you're down there, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and hit the bell icon so you'll be notified of all future uploads. I try really hard to make sure I upload at least one video a week. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you might even get a bonus video. Ooh, sequel-tastic. If you'd like to chat, banter, or commiserate between uploads, all of my social media will be linked down in the description box below, including a link to my website, The World of Champagne, at JanessaJ.com. Thank you so much for watching. I love and appreciate all of you. Thanks for stopping by. I am loving spooky season. I hope you are too. Let me know in the comments your favorite horror movies that you're watching this year. Talk to Me is a favorite for me. And until I see you again, bye.
You know, could have done that before I started pressing record. Do you get all that many comments in your...
No.
Someday.
Just friends. Someday
Someday the trolls will come after you. The nerds will find you.
My trolls will come. 1978's Halloween. So they said that Jamie Lee Curtis had a daughter named Jamie Lloyd. And, so they said that Laurie Strode, I couldn't figure out why she would name her daughter after herself. And then I was like, because her name isn't Jamie in the movie. And so he actually catches Jamie Lloyd and kills her. I sound like I'm sad about it. And it's really poorly watched. It's poorly watched. Well, the other story that's happening in Halle Kills. Halle Berry Kills. But Paul, call me. I still love you. Clueless forever. Team Josh.